What if the Book of Enoch is the original narrative? What if Enoch, whatever manuscript Enoch wrote, let's assume Enoch was a historical character.
Right.
He wrote something consistent, generally consistent with First Enoch. What if that's the original story?
Right.
That would mean then that the Sumerian story is an aberration, is a bastardization of the original document.
Yeah.
Which was written long before the Sumerian culture existed.
I don't know much about why Enoch is left out. This is all still fairly new to me, but it seems interesting. Like, I believe it's Ethiopia; they still have it in their Bible, but other cultures decided we're just not going to do this.
Well, the Book of Enoch is a very complicated topic. First Enoch, there's three versions: first, second, third. The second and third versions, one's a Slavonic version, and then one's a Hebrew version. They are different traditions. First Enoch, the earliest sections of First Enoch, again, namely the Book of the Watchers and the Book of Parables, are unquestionably written before the birth of Christ. And probably, in my estimation, they come from a tradition, or those very manuscripts might even go all the way back to the antediluvian world, which would make them one, if not the earliest manuscripts that we have. Now, of course, that can be disputed all day long, but it's a possibility. Enoch is I call it the Enochian tale. Now, let's be careful, because I separate the Book of the Watchers and the Book of Parables, the earliest sections of Enoch, from the sections that come after, like the course of the heavenly luminaries and the dream visions and the other material in First Enoch. I put those in a different category because they're written after Christ. And what's remarkable is that the parables specifically contain all kinds of oracles in them pertaining to the Messiah.
Right.
And they're very specific, and they're just as remarkable, some of them, if not more remarkable, than the oracles pertaining to Christ in the Old Testament. Jesus, for example, refers to himself as the Son of Man more often than any other title. And he had a handful of titles to choose from the Old Testament. He refers to himself as the Son of Man. And we think that he's, and I say we, the conventional Christian thought is that he refers to himself as the Son of Man because of a reference in the book of Daniel, where Daniel sees one like a Son of Man. That's not a definitive title. That's a description of somebody who looks like a human being.
Right.
One like a Son of Man and the Son of Man are two different things.
For sure.
Whereas the book of Enoch has oracles, prophecies, many, that are explicitly refer to the Son of Man, not one like a Son of Man, but a proper title, the Son of Man. And so when Jesus is using this particular epithet of himself, the Jews know exactly who he's claiming to be,
right,
because they're conversant with the oracles of Enoch, and that is indisputable. The scribe class and the writers of the New Testament were conversant with the oracles of Enoch. James, the brother of Jesus, or rather Jude, writes the book, I think I got that right. James, I think, wrote the book of Jude, writes verbatim. He incorporates verbatim verses right out of the book of Enoch.
Right.
He doesn't summarize them. He doesn't truncate them. He literally takes verse for verse from First Enoch, the manuscript we have today. He takes it verse for verse and pastes it into that epistle,
giving it clear credence that it was a serious thing.
And so it's not only was the author of Jude conversant with Enoch, he literally quotes it verbatim.
Right.
And not only does he quote it verbatim, he says he refers to Enoch, the prophet, wrote, and then he incorporates it into his epistle. So that's pretty definitive. Then Peter references the story. He doesn't put a verse in there from First Enoch, but he directly references the story. And I believe that Genesis 6, the writer of Genesis 6, is referencing the book of Enoch when he writes in Genesis 6 that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were comely, and they decided to take wives from them.
Yep.
And then it talks about the Nephilim. That is a reference to to a story that was well known among the Hebrews at the time.
Yeah.
And for all time. It's what I call the Enochian tale. It's the story of Enoch, of first Enoch. And you find there are many, many, many more examples of this. In fact, I don't have it in front of me, but I actually published a book of Enoch. I wrote commentary and introduction to Enoch. I did it with Luke and Nate from the Glory Creatures podcast.
That's right.
And I, in my introduction to Enoch, I go through this. I demonstrate how the writers of the New and Old Testament were conversant with the book of Enoch, with first Enoch. So I would go so far as to say that you cannot separate the Enochian narrative from either the Old Testament or New Testament of the Bible.
Right.
You cannot separate them.
You see it referenced in both clearly.
They are intermixed. The story of Enoch is interlaced through the Old and New Testament. And again, it's quoted verbatim by Jude. I misspoke in the beginning. Jude, who was one of Jesus's half-brothers,
right,
quotes Enoch verbatim in his epistle.
May I ask how your father, who I believe you said was a pastor, views some of these views that you have about the Bible? Is there any pushback or arguments there? I'm curious.
My father was a very good pastor, and but he was very conventional in his thinking. Mm-hmm. I remember he passed away in 2020, and I published my book or he might have passed away in 2021. I think he passed away in 2021. I published my book in 2020. He hadn't read my book, but he did hear me espousing my views on a couple of different interviews, and he was struggling with the same thing that a lot of people struggle with.
Right.
He could not understand, for example, the idea of aliens outside of what he would have considered to be the only option available to someone who adheres to the biblical text, demons.
Right.
So that was his worldview, and I never really bothered to argue with him about it. But
right.
In fact, it was one of the last conversations that we had. He wanted to talk about that before he died.
Oh, wow.
But it's very difficult for people because when you break that paradigm, rather, let me say that more accurately, when you are confronted with ideas that we've been talking about today, and you're willing to accept them, or at the very least, you're willing to consider them, what it does is it forces you to expand your paradigm. Mm-hmm. And that expansion is uncomfortable for people. It's not a good feeling. It's for many people, it's very uncomfortable because this paradigm that you have, this worldview that you've crafted, it's a comfort zone. And as long as things fit into that paradigm, you can make sense of the world. Yeah. But as soon as you realize that your paradigm is too constricting, too small, too limiting, and you have to forcibly expand it, it's very difficult for people. Mm-hmm. They have a hard time. They flounder. For me, it's exciting.
Yeah.
But for a lot of people, there's a conflict, and there's an internal conflict that goes along with that, primarily because of different doctrinal traditions and also denominational traditions. And so people are very reluctant to do that. And it also exposes our ignorance, all of us. Every time we realize that we don't have a big enough paradigm, it exposes our ignorance.
Yeah.
And that doesn't feel good.
Yep.
That's not a good feeling. But, ultimately, though, it's liberating.
I agree. I mean,
because I absolutely, as people who listen to me know, I absolutely affirm, confess, declare the gospel of Jesus Christ, and it is the foundation of everything that I believe. I've been absolutely convinced, both in my mind and in my heart, that the gospel of Christ is true, that Jesus of Nazareth is precisely who he said he was, namely the Messiah, the Son of God. And that never changes. But everything else is in flux. For example,
Right.
the possibility of extraterrestrial civilizations that are also in the game, so to speak, that it's not just these four characters that we mentioned earlier, that there might be an abundance of life in the universe. That at one time was inconceivable to me, until I was forced to accept certain realities and allow for the expansion of my worldview. And it was
Yeah.
a difficult process, but ultimately it's very fruitful and very satisfying.
So forgive me if this is a little too personal, and you don't have to answer if it is, but a lot of people who listen, including myself, they write into me, or I'm thinking about it, like raising your kids, and what you tell them in terms of, the conventional way of looking at the Bible, but then everything that we're talking about outside of it. Like, do you like, at a certain age are going to get into it? Is it just from the beginning you get into it? Do you think about that with them?
My kids hear me talking about this stuff all the time.
Yeah.
They hear me conversing. People come over and we'll sit there and have a cup of coffee at my kitchen table, and my kids will be listening to every word I'm saying. With my kids, when me and my wife, if we do a Bible study with our kids, we want to reinforce the things that are most important. And the things that are most important are not aliens and giants and all this kind of stuff that I always talk about that I'm just very fascinated with and find entertaining. We reinforce the meaning of the gospel and how they ought to conduct themselves in the world and so forth. Those are the things that when I have an opportunity to sit down with my boys, I have 5 boys, those are the things that we focus on now. My kids ask me questions all the time about aliens and giants and stuff like that, and that's fun. And when they do, I answer them in a way that I feel is, or I attempt to answer them in a way that is understandable, because some of the stuff is very deep and complex. But I feel like them growing up, having a foundation in the gospel of Christ, but having all of these other things floating around, I think they're going to have much less of a difficulty than I did dealing with certain realities. I mean, and when I say that, being confronted, for example, with the UFO phenomenon in the way that I've been confronted with it, and having people who were and are being abducted by gray aliens coming to me and telling me their stories and asking me for help and advice, and you have to confront these realities, and you have to if you're going to try and make sense of them at all, you have to do so in the most logical, open-minded way possible, or you're never going to gain any understanding into these complex topics.
Yep. It goes back to the active understanding you were talking about with the relic, the Bible. Well, that's a great answer. Timothy, I'm going to let you go. This has been a really incredible conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time to hang with us. Where can people find you online? Where can they find your books?
My handle is always the same on social media, Timothy Alberino. My YouTube channel is Timothy Alberino. I'm on Instagram and X. I have a members community, the alberinoanalysis.com, where we go deep into these topics. There's a lot of great content. We're reviewing, actually, right now. We're on like the 7th installment of a review of David Flynn's book, Sidonia, which is mind-blowing.
Okay, got to read it.
And my book, Birthright, is on Amazon. And my Book of Enoch is also on Amazon. If people are interested in the Book of Enoch, you can find both Birthright and Enoch on Amazon. And my version of the Book of Enoch has I provide commentary and an introduction, so you're going to get a little bit of a different. And we also have we put concept art in there,
awesome,
which is really cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, so I highly recommend it. I love the way Birthright's written. The information is great. Thank you for writing it, man. Thank you for joining us, and hopefully we'll do this again soon.
I appreciate it. Anytime.
Cool, man. Have a good one.